Welcome back. Today we are discussing the Incoterms 2020 published by International Chamber of Commerce, in short for ICC. If you have ever bought or sold anything internationally, you have probably seen strange three-letter acronyms like FOB, CIF, or DDP. What do they even mean? Well, today we're demystifying all of that. We are going to do a deep dive into Incoterms 2020. Trust me, by the end, you will understand them clearly. You will also be able to exercise in practical fields whether you are a business person or practitioners in financial industry. So what are Incoterms? Simply put, they are a set of rules published by the International Chamber of Commerce, or ICC. They define the responsibilities of sellers and buyers for the delivery of goods under sales contracts. They tell you who is responsible for what, and when that responsibility or risk transfers from the seller to the buyer. Think of them as the universal language of international trade. Getting them right can save you a ton of money and headaches. Getting them wrong? Well, that can lead to lost shipments, unexpected costs, and major disputes. The 2020 version, which is the latest one, has 11 official rules. Let us be familiar with the acronym of the 11 Incoterms. They can be divided into two groups. The first group has 7 rules that can be used for any mode of transport: sea, air, road, rail, as you name them. They are EXW, FCA, CPT, CIP, DAP, DPU, and DDP. The second group has 4 rules that are specifically for sea and inland waterway transport only. They are FAS, FOB, CFR, and CIF. To make it easier, we can split them into 2 groups. Let us start with the first group, the ones for any mode of transport. First up is EXW, which stands for Ex-Works. This one is super simple and gives the most responsibility to the buyer. The seller just has to make the goods available at their own premises, like their factory or warehouse. That's it. From that point on, the buyer handles everything: loading the goods, arranging all transportation, handling customs clearance for both export and import, and paying all the costs. For example, if a clothing factory in Vietnam sells shirts using Incoterms EXW, the buyer from France is responsible for picking them up from the factory door in Vietnam and getting them all the way to their shop in Paris. The risk transfers to the buyer as soon as the goods are available for pickup. Next, we have the F rule: delivered at place. The seller is responsible for delivering the goods to a named destination, ready for unloading. The seller handles all costs and risks involved in bringing the goods to that destination, including export clearance and transportation. The buyer is only responsible for import customs clearance and unloading the truck or vessel. For example, if you buy furniture in DAP terms from a supplier in Italy to your warehouse in London, the Italian seller arranges everything to get the furniture to your London warehouse door. Your only job is to unload it and handle the UK import procedures. Next is DPU, or delivered at place unloaded. This is a new rule in Incoterms 2020, replacing the old DAT rule. It's the only Incoterm that requires the seller to unload the goods at the destination. So, with DPU, the seller does everything as DAP does, plus they unload the goods in addition. Using our furniture example, if the terms were DPU your London warehouse, the Italian seller would be responsible for unloading the furniture from the truck and placing it on your loading dock. The risk transfers to you once the goods are unloaded, and where the seller handles the first leg of the journey. Let's start with FCA, or free carrier. This is a really flexible and popular rule. Here, the seller is responsible for delivering the goods to a carrier or another person nominated by the buyer at a named place. This could be the seller's own premises or another location like a freight forwarder's warehouse or an airport. the seller also handles export customs clearance. Once the goods are delivered to that carrier, the risk transfers to the buyer. So, if a German company sells machinery in Incoterms FCA to a buyer in Brazil, they might deliver it to a specific shipping terminal in Hamburg. Once the truck arrives at the terminal and the goods are handed over, the German seller's job is done. The Brazilian buyer takes over from there. Now for the C rules. These are a bit trickier because the point where risk transfers is different from the point where cost transfers. Keep that in mind. The C stands for carriage. First is CPT, or carriage paid to. With CPT, the seller arranges and pays for the carriage of the goods to a named destination. For example, a Korean electronics company sells CPT to a destination in Los Angeles. The Korean seller pays for the freight to get the goods to Los Angeles. However, and this is the crucial part, the risk transfers from the seller to the buyer much earlier. It transfers once the goods are handed over to the first carrier in the seller's country. So if that shipment from Korea gets damaged on the ship somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, it's the buyer's problem, even though the seller paid for the shipping. Very similar to CPT is CIP, which stands for carriage and insurance paid to. It's exactly the same as CPT, but with one key difference. The seller must also arrange and pay for insurance for the goods during transit. Under Incoterms 2020, CIP requires a higher level of insurance coverage, known as Institute Cargo Clauses A, which is quite comprehensive. The seller pays for the carriage and the insurance to the named destination. But again, the risk transfers to the buyer back when the goods are given to the first carrier. Finally, in this first group, we have the D rules, which stand for delivered. These place the most responsibility on the seller. First is DAP, or deliver rule in this group. The king of seller responsibility is DDP, or delivered duty paid. This is the ultimate turnkey solution for the buyer. The seller is responsible for everything. They deliver the goods to the buyer's chosen destination, cleared for import, with all taxes and duties paid. The buyer literally just has to receive the goods. So if you order something DDP from China to your home in the US, the seller handles shipping, insurance, US customs, import duties, and final delivery to your doorstep. You don't have to worry about a thing. Alright, that's the first group of 7. Now let's quickly cover the 4 rules that are specifically for sea and inland waterway transport. You should not use these for air freight or containerized cargo that gets handed over at a terminal. First is FAS, or free alongside ship. Here, the seller delivers the goods when they are placed alongside the vessel nominated by the buyer at the named port of shipment. Think of it as delivering to the dock right next to the ship. From that moment, the buyer assumes all costs and risks. The seller handles export customs. So, a seller of grain in the US might deliver it FAS to a ship in the port of New Orleans. Once the grain is on the quay, ready to be loaded, the seller's job is done. Next, and probably the most famous Incoterms, is FOB, or free on board. This is a classic. The seller delivers the goods when they are placed on board the vessel nominated by the buyer at the named port of shipment. The key difference from FAS is that the goods must physically be on the ship. The moment the goods cross the ship's rail, the risk transfers to the buyer. For a long time, people used FOB for container shipments, but FCA is actually the more appropriate rule for that now. FOB is best for bulk cargo like oil or coal. Now we have the last 2 C rules, which are for sea transport only. Remember, risk and cost transfer at different points. CFR stands for cost and freight. The seller must pay the costs and freight necessary to bring the goods to the named port of destination. However, just like CPT, the risk transfers to the buyer much earlier. It transfers when the goods are on board the vessel in the port of shipment. So, a Thai rice exporter selling CFR to Dubai pays for the sea freight to Dubai, but if the ship sinks, it's the buyer's risk. The buyer is also responsible for insurance. And our final Incoterm is CIF, which stands for Cost, Insurance, and Freight. This is identical to CFR, but the seller also has to procure and pay for marine insurance against the buyer's risk of loss or damage to the goods during the carriage. Under Incoterms 2020, CIF only requires a minimum level of insurance, Institute Cargo Clauses C. If the buyer wants more comprehensive coverage, they need to either agree on it with the seller or arrange it themselves. So, with CIF, the seller pays for the sea freight and basic insurance to the destination port. But the risk still transfers to the buyer once the goods are loaded onto the ship back at the origin, and that's it. All 11 Incoterms 2020 explained, from X where the buyer does almost everything, to DDP where the seller does it all. Risk passes from buyer to seller in the named place or port with Incoterms EXW, DPU, DDP, DAP, FCA, FOB, and FAS. Risk passes from the buyer to the seller at the place or port of delivery with Incoterms CFR, CPT, CIF, and CIP. Choosing the right Incoterm is a critical business decision. It affects your price, your risk, your control over the shipment, and your cash flow. Always make sure you specify the rule clearly in your contract, followed by the named place and Incoterms 2020. For example, FCA Hamburg Port Terminal 2, Incoterms 2020. I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully it gives you a much clearer picture of how global trade works. It's a fascinating and essential system that keeps the world's economy moving. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more content just like this. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. See you in the next video.